They told you to stay calm, stay small, stay agreeable, and slowly, without even realizing it, you obeyed. But deep inside you, something still burns, a force you've suppressed for years. It shows up in your envy of the bold, your resentment of the powerful, your silence when you should have spoken. This is not weakness, it's power buried alive. Machiavelli didn't fear those who shouted. He feared the ones who had been quiet for too long. Because once they remember who they are, the world can no longer control them. There is a kind of person who walks through life invisible, not because they are weak, but because they were taught to be. They sit quietly in rooms full of noise. They smile when they're overlooked. They apologize for their opinions before they even speak them. These are not the forgotten, Machiavelli would say. These are the restrained. And restraint, in its purest form, is not submission, it is potential waiting to be weaponized. You may think that your quietness makes you insignificant, but what if it's the opposite? What if your silence has been your camouflage, your invisibility, your armor? The world loves to tell people like you that power is loud, that it wears crowns, raises voices, breaks doors down. But Machiavelli knew better. He understood the most dangerous people are not the ones who flaunt their strength, but the ones who hide it, not out of fear, but out of strategy. You've been suppressing something not out of weakness, but out of necessity, to survive in a world that punishes boldness unless it comes from the right mouth. You learn to lower your tone, to defer, to dim the light in your eyes, and yet that power never left you. It twisted into other forms, into envy, into frustration, into a quiet dissatisfaction that you tried to name as anxiety or sadness, but which was actually your soul trying to reclaim itself. Machiavelli believed that those who forget their own strength are the easiest to control, not because they lack power, but because they no longer recognize it in themselves. And the tragedy is not just that they are used, it's that they agree to be. You've been convinced that your value lies in staying agreeable. But there's a shift that happens when a person begins to suspect they are more powerful than they were told. It begins subtly, a pause before apologizing, a refusal to laugh at someone else's power, a question whispered in the mind. What if I stopped hiding? That is where this begins. Not with domination, not with vengeance, but with awareness, a remembering. Because the truth is this: the world has not rejected your power, it has only tricked you into rejecting it yourself. And the moment you stop believing that lie, you don't need anyone to give it back. You just take it, quietly, permanently. They did not take your power. They trained you to bury it. It started early, before you even knew what power meant. A raised voice was punished. A strong opinion became disrespect. You were rewarded not for being bold, but for being manageable. The more you complied, the more approval you received. And so you learned not through words, but through repetition that strength would cost you love, that safety meant silence. Machiavelli would call this the first conquest, not of your body, but of your mind. To control someone entirely, you do not need chains, you only need to convince them that their own fire is dangerous. That is how kings are built, not by raising themselves, but by lowering others. The system you live in survives by making you small. Workplaces do not reward the most competent, they reward the most compliant. Families do not always protect the most honest child, they protect the quietest one. Even religion has been used to frame obedience as virtue and rebellion as sin. But Machiavelli understood something darker. The ones who are praised for their submission are not loved. They are tolerated, used, held in place until they are no longer useful. The moment you begin to question why you always defer, you are not becoming defiant, you are becoming awake. You are remembering that the fear you carry is not yours. It was planted in you by those who needed you beneath them. And every time you shrink to make others comfortable, you are feeding the illusion that you were ever meant to be below them. Ask yourself, who benefits from your insecurity? Who gains when you second-guess your instincts? Who smiles when you hesitate to speak? Machiavelli believed that every power structure depends on this kind of conditioning. The more deeply it roots in your mind, the less it has to show up with weapons. Your own thoughts will become the leash. That is why most people never break out of their cage. They don't see it anymore. They've mistaken comfort for freedom. But here is the truth. If you are always accepted, you are not being seen clearly. You are being filtered, watered down, endorsed only in your most harmless form. That is not belonging. That is manipulation. And the moment you realize it, a question begins to grow louder than your fear. What would happen if I stopped asking for permission? Most never ask that. But those who do begin to walk differently, speak differently, think differently. And the world, which once ignored them, begins to react. Because suppressed power doesn't vanish, it waits, quietly, patiently, until one day, the person you trained to stay small steps forward and does something terrifying. They remember. You think being nice makes you good, harmless, safe. But Machiavelli would call it what it truly is, self-erasure. Chronic niceness is not virtue. It is fear dressed in politeness. It is the habit of cutting your own power into smaller, softer pieces so that no one else feels uncomfortable. You say yes when you mean no. You nod when your blood screams otherwise. You smile while being dismissed, hoping that if you are agreeable enough, someone will finally reward you with respect. But respect is not given to the endlessly nice. It is given to those who draw lines, the ones who say, I will not shrink for you, I will not burn for your comfort. Niceness without boundaries is not kindness, it is self-betrayal. It is a long, slow death of identity, one polite compromise at a time. Machiavelli saw it clearly. He believed most people carry a secret need to be accepted, not because they are weak, but because they were raised in environments where love was conditional. They became pleasers, not out of choice, but survival. They learned early that their truth was too much, so they buried it under charm, under smiles, under silence. And yet, the more agreeable they became, the more invisible they felt. That is the trap. The more you try to be accepted by everyone, the more you disappear to yourself. Your power is not in your ability to be liked, it is in your ability to be felt. To leave a presence in the room that does not dissolve the moment you leave. Niceness tries to be a shield, but in reality, it makes you easier to manipulate. People test your boundaries not because they are cruel, but because they sense you have none. And in a world built on hierarchies, those without edges get stepped on, not always maliciously, often unconsciously. Because the human mind responds to clarity, to tension, to gravity. And chronic niceness has no gravity. It floats, it yields, it bends in all directions until there is nothing solid left. If you want to awaken your power, stop trying to be palatable. You are not a product. You are not here to be tolerated. You are here to remember that softness without strength is not kindness, it is submission. And the more you give it away, the more the world will demand. But the moment you stop apologizing for who you are, you become someone people have to adjust to, someone they cannot mold, someone they cannot silence with expectation. That is when power returns, not in rage, not in noise, but in the quiet decision to stop offering yourself to those who only love you when you're easy to swallow. Machiavelli knew the truth. The nicest ones are the most dangerous once they finally decide to stop being nice. There is a kind of strength that does not move, does not shout, and does not beg to be seen. It simmers quietly beneath the surface, waiting. Machiavelli called it contained fire, the kind of power that makes others uneasy without ever saying a word. You have felt it before. In someone who walks into a room and says nothing, yet everyone becomes aware of them. In someone who doesn't need to interrupt, because the weight of their silence speaks louder than most people's words. This is not an accident. It is not charisma. It is control. The most dangerous people are not the ones who constantly show force, but the ones who understand when not to. You were taught that power is about expression, about constant action. But Machiavelli knew the opposite was true. Those who act constantly are ruled by impulse. They are predictable, and in strategy, predictability is a weakness. Controlled fire, on the other hand, is terrifying because no one knows when it will burn. You do not need to always speak to be powerful. You do not need to always fight to be feared. In fact, the more often you unleash your energy, the more people get used to it. They begin to expect it. It loses impact. But when you contain your power, when you hold it like a blade sheathed under silk, others feel its presence even in your stillness. That is what makes it effective. There is a difference between being powerless and being patient. Most people do not know how to hold their strength without leaking it. They react too quickly. They respond to every insult. They explain themselves to be understood. And in doing so, they reveal their thresholds. But the one who contains their fire reveals nothing. They wait, they watch, and they choose their moments. When they move, it is with force. When they speak, it is with precision. And when they strike, it is unforgettable. You have that fire in you. The problem is not its absence. It is your discomfort with holding it in. You were taught that self-restraint is weakness, that silence is submission. But Machiavelli saw silence as strategy. Control, to him, was not the lack of power. It was the perfect storage of it, like a flame kept low until the right moment comes. So if you feel like there is something inside you building, growing, pressing against the cage of your habits, do not rush to release it. Learn to hold it, study it, let it shape you from the inside. Because when the time comes, and it always does, those who have trained their fire to wait will be the only ones left standing. Not because they were stronger, but because they were more precise. And in the end, that is what power truly is, not loud, not constant, but devastating in its timing. Frustration is not your enemy. It is your mirror. Every time you feel it rise in your chest, it is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a signal that something powerful inside you has been trapped. Machiavelli understood this long before psychology gave it a name. He believed that resentment, jealousy, and irritation were not flaws in character. They were the early warning signs of suppressed strength. When you envy someone's boldness, you are not admiring them, you are remembering a version of yourself that you abandoned. When you feel anger at being overlooked, it is not because you are weak, but because something inside you knows you deserve more than invisibility. That ache in your gut, the one that stings when others rise and you remain silent, is not bitterness. It is a reminder that you were meant to rise too. You are not envious of them. You are starving to return to yourself. This is the war most people never realize they are fighting. They think their mood is the problem, so they try to numb it. They bury it under distraction, humor, overthinking, even spiritual language. But Machiavelli would ask, what if your discomfort is not meant to be healed? What if it is meant to be heard? Because frustration is the voice of your power trying to get your attention. It shows you exactly where you have been too quiet, too soft, too late. And until you stop mislabeling these emotions as weakness, you will keep punishing yourself for the very energy that could free you. There is no shame in jealousy. What matters is what you do with it. If it makes you shrink, you've misunderstood it. But if it makes you move, if it forces you to ask, why not me? Then it becomes fuel. Machiavelli believed that the strongest people are not the ones without envy, but the ones who know how to use it. They turn it inward, not to destroy themselves, but to reawaken the part of them that forgot it could compete. The key is observation. Watch what makes you feel small. Watch who triggers your bitterness. Then ask yourself what they represent. Not who they are, but what part of your own potential they reflect back to you. Because the truth is, power is magnetic. You feel drawn to what you already carry. And if something stirs your hunger, it's because that thing belongs to you in some way. You've just forgotten how to claim it. The world tells you to stay calm, stay content, stay kind. But Machiavelli would tell you to listen to your unrest, because it knows something your mind is afraid to admit. You are not done, you are not satisfied, and you are not powerless. You are simply remembering that you were meant for more, and frustration is how your strength begins to knock on the door. There is a reason the world is quick to praise your humility, but slow to reward your strength. Power unsettles people not just because they fear what you'll do with it, but because it forces them to confront what they gave up in themselves. Machiavelli believed that insecurity was the most profitable resource in society. Entire empires are built on the backs of people who don't know their worth. Because a person who doubts themselves will overwork, overgive, overexplain. They will seek permission, beg for praise, and hand over their best ideas just to feel needed. You have been conditioned to believe that seeking approval is normal, that it is polite to wait until someone recognizes your value before you act like it exists. But the truth is, the longer you wait for that validation, the more control others have over your life. Insecure people are easy to manage. They second-guess their instincts. They need reassurance before every decision. And because of that, they rarely lead, they follow. Not because they lack intelligence, but because they've been taught to mistrust their own voice. Machiavelli saw this in courts and kingdoms, in merchants and monarchs alike. He knew that insecurity was not something to pity, it was something to exploit. And the harsh truth is, most people will not fix your insecurity, they will feed off it. The colleague who always interrupts you doesn't want to hear your full thought. They want your hesitation. The partner who keeps you unsure doesn't fear losing you, they fear losing the version of you that doesn't know they have options. The world is full of people who benefit from your confusion. That is why you must stop asking who you are and start deciding it. Because the longer you remain unsure, the more space you leave for someone else to fill in the answer. You are not confused. You are afraid of what will happen if you stop apologizing for your power, because once you stop needing permission, you will be forced to confront the weight of your own potential. And that is terrifying, not because you can't carry it, but because you always could. You just needed to believe it. Machiavelli would tell you to look closely at where you leak your confidence. Who do you shrink around? Who do you over-explain yourself to? That is where your power is bleeding out. And it does not return through force. It returns through clarity. You reclaim your strength the moment you stop asking to be seen, and instead act like you already are. The world does not change for those who beg. It changes for those who decide. And if that decision makes others uncomfortable, let it. Because the ones who truly respect you never required your insecurity in the first place. There comes a moment when silence becomes unbearable. Not the silence around you, but the silence within you, the silence of a voice you have been suppressing for years. You feel it in passing conversations, in the weight behind a fake smile, in the way your body tenses every time you swallow a truth. And then, something inside you begins to ask a question you've never dared say out loud. What if I stopped apologizing for existing? Machiavelli called this the beginning of a psychological rebellion, not against others, but against the version of yourself you created just to survive. That version kept you safe. It helped you blend in, avoid conflict, earn praise, but it also made you smaller. And eventually, the safety becomes a prison. The rebellion begins quietly. You stop laughing at what you don't find funny. You stop saying, "It's fine," when it's not. You stop shrinking yourself just to make others feel tall. And in those small refusals, something begins to return, the part of you that never wanted to fit in, but to be free. Machiavelli understood that control starts in the mind. Before kings ruled cities, they had to rule their own self-image. They had to believe they deserved power, even when others called them mad for claiming it. You cannot rise while holding on to a self-image built on guilt. You must break it. Replace the question, "Am I enough?" with something far more dangerous. Who profits from me thinking I'm not? That is when everything begins to change. You see manipulation for what it is, not personal, but strategic. People doubted you not because they saw weakness, but because they feared what would happen if you saw your strength. The rebellion is not about vengeance. It's not about being cruel or loud. It's about remembering you never needed to be accepted by people who only loved the muted version of you. Machiavelli would say this shift is not a moment, it is a process. You do not wake up fearless. You wake up fed up, tired of your own silence, exhausted from overthinking every move. And from that exhaustion, courage is born. Not the kind that seeks applause, but the kind that quietly rewrites your posture, your voice, your presence. You become someone who does not flinch at discomfort, someone who does not wait to be chosen. Someone who understands that being liked is not the same as being respected. The rebellion lives in the moment you finally stop explaining yourself to people who never wanted to understand you in the first place. You do not owe them clarity. You owe yourself freedom, and freedom begins with a decision to no longer live as the version of you that the world finds easiest to control. That is the rebellion Machiavelli admired most, the one that starts behind the eyes and ends with a person who cannot be ignored. There are parts of you you've been taught to fear: rage, pride, ambition, desire. From a young age, you were told to hide them, control them, starve them. These were labeled as dangerous emotions, signs of ego, symptoms of sin. But Machiavelli saw them differently. He believed these so-called flaws were not weaknesses, they were raw materials, untamed energy. Potential waiting to be forged into power. The world told you to be humble, even when you were brilliant, to forgive, even when you were betrayed, to settle, even when you were starving. And the more you obeyed, the more your power turned inward, festering, twisting, silencing itself. But suppressed power does not disappear. It transforms into self-doubt, into burnout, into a quiet resentment toward everyone who chose themselves while you were busy being good. Machiavelli understood that those who rise do not rise by accident. They rise because they stop treating their darker emotions as poison and start using them as fuel. Pride, when refined, becomes self-respect. Rage, when focused, becomes action. Desire, when disciplined, becomes direction. These are not emotions to run from, they are forces to command. The truth is, the world is not run by the most moral. It is run by those who are no longer at war with themselves, and that begins by making peace with your own fire. You were told that ambition is selfish. But what is more selfish, to chase what lights your soul on fire, or to live a half-life that makes no one stronger, not even yourself? You were told that pride is arrogant. But what is arrogance, if not the sin of being visible while powerful? You are told that desire is dangerous. But what happens to a person who denies what they want for too long? They become a shell, easy to predict, easy to manipulate, easy to discard. Machiavelli would argue that it is not your darkness that makes you dangerous, it is your denial of it. Because whatever you bury becomes a weapon someone else can use against you. But when you face it, when you name it, study it, sharpen it, it becomes yours again. Power is not found in pretending to be pure. It is found in becoming whole. The saint who knows how to wield anger will outlast the pacifist who doesn't. The quiet thinker who channels desire will outmaneuver the disciplined ascetic who's forgotten what it means to want. So take back what you've suppressed. Not recklessly, not wildly, but with precision, with intention. You do not need to be perfect to be powerful. You need to be complete. Machiavelli would tell you this. The parts of you that frighten you the most are often the keys to your freedom. Do not kill them. Train them. Because when your darker emotions become your allies, no one can weaponize them against you again. In a world addicted to noise, solitude is rebellion. Everyone is rushing, talking, posting, reacting, desperate to prove they exist. But Machiavelli knew that power is not built in the crowd. It is built in silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of strategy. Solitude is not loneliness. It is the forge, the place where distraction dies and self-mastery begins. When you are alone, there is no applause to chase, no opinions to please, no mirrors held up by others to distort your reflection. There is only you, raw, unfiltered, unavoidable. That is why most people run from it. They fill every quiet moment with noise because they fear what they might hear in stillness. But Machiavelli would argue that the strongest individuals are not the ones who know how to command others. They are the ones who have sat with their own thoughts long enough to no longer be commanded by them. Solitude reveals your patterns. It shows you how often your actions are reactions, how much of your life has been spent responding instead of choosing. In solitude, your real motives rise to the surface. The truths you hide, the fears you disguise as logic, the desires you dilute to seem reasonable, all of them begin to speak, and for the first time you have no excuse not to listen. This is why Machiavelli valued solitude not as a luxury, but as a discipline, a ritual, a place where identity is stripped down and rebuilt on purpose, not performance. He believed that clarity was the beginning of power, and clarity only comes when you stop chasing noise long enough to feel your own thoughts sharpen. In a culture that equates busyness with importance, choosing solitude makes you look invisible, but that invisibility is a weapon. While others rush to be seen, you are preparing to be felt. Not now, but later, when the timing is right, when the mask is off, when the room quiets, and suddenly, it's your voice they wait for. That moment only belongs to those who trained for it in private. So do not fear your time alone. Use it. Let it make you dangerous, because the one who emerges from solitude is not the same as the one who entered it. They do not seek validation. They do not flinch in uncertainty. They do not act to be praised, they act to be effective. Machiavelli would remind you that kings are not born on stages. They are formed in the unseen hours, in the empty rooms, in the long walks and closed doors where power begins as a whisper. So go there. Step into your own silence. Let it break you open. Let it rebuild you, because the world does not need another voice shouting to be noticed. It needs one that speaks after preparing in the quiet, and when it does, everyone listens. Power, when released too often, becomes predictable, and predictable people are easy to control. Machiavelli believed that real power is not loud or constant, it is restrained, stored, and then released with terrifying precision. This is the art of controlled eruption. Most people waste their strength in small bursts. They argue over nonsense. They explain themselves to the wrong audience. They react emotionally to every slight. And in doing so, they drain their influence before it ever has a chance to matter. But the dangerous ones, they wait, they watch, they conserve. Not because they are weak, but because they know that power is most effective when it arrives unexpectedly. A whisper after long silence, a move after long stillness, an eruption when no one thought you would dare. You do not need to fight every battle. You need to choose when to reveal the power you have been shaping in the dark. Not every insult requires a response. Not every challenge deserves your attention. The more you train yourself to hold your energy, the more control you gain, not just over others, but over yourself. Controlled eruption is not about suppression. It is about timing. It is about knowing that if you speak too soon, they won't hear you. If you act too early, they won't fear you. You must strike at the moment when your silence has made them underestimate you. That is when it lands the deepest. That is when it becomes unforgettable. Most people are addicted to being understood. They rush to correct every misconception. But Machiavelli would tell you to let them misjudge you. Let them think you are harmless, until the moment you decide otherwise. There is power in being misunderstood, in hiding your sharpest thoughts behind your calmest eyes. You are not here to constantly prove yourself. You are here to be effective, and effectiveness requires discipline. The discipline to feel everything but say nothing, to know everything but reveal only fragments, to be capable of destruction but choose restraint until the moment restraint no longer serves you. And when that moment comes, do not hesitate. Do not warn them. Do not ask if it's the right time. You'll know, because the fire you have been holding will no longer burn you from the inside. It will burn through everything in front of you. One move, one sentence, one decision. That is all it takes when it is timed correctly. Machiavelli admired those who waited, not out of fear, but out of purpose. Because power that arrives when it is least expected is not just effective, it is unforgettable. You do not need to be feared all the time. You only need to make sure that when the time comes, you are never underestimated again. Everyone carries pain, but not everyone knows what to do with it. Most try to outrun it, cover it in distractions, drown it in noise, bury it under fake smiles and forced positivity. But Machiavelli understood that pain, when faced directly, is not a burden. It is a blueprint. He believed that those who have suffered and survived without collapsing carry something the untouched never will command, not over others, but over themselves. Because once you've walked through fire and kept your soul intact, what exactly is left to fear? Pain either makes you defensive or it makes you divine. That choice belongs to you. If you refuse to learn from it, it will haunt you. It will leak into your relationships, poison your thoughts, and bend your spine without you realizing it. But if you choose to confront it, something begins to shift. You stop reacting, you stop chasing, you stop asking for peace from people who benefit from your chaos, because you already earned your peace, not through ease, but through endurance. Most people assume strength is built through practice, but Machiavelli would argue that the deepest strength is built through suffering, through loss that cracked your voice, through betrayal that taught you silence, through moments where you thought you were done but you got up anyway. There is a kind of authority that comes only from having known agony without letting it turn you cruel. That is a different kind of power. It's not loud. It doesn't boast. But when you walk into a room, it follows you like a shadow. The person who has suffered and processed that suffering does not flinch at uncertainty. They do not fold when others disapprove. They have already faced the void and survived. What can anyone take from them now? Machiavelli saw this as the true evolution of power, not the loud king or the rich merchant, but the man or woman who has turned their suffering into sharpness, into discernment, into discipline. Because once you've lived through something that tried to break you, you begin to see clearly. You spot manipulation before it arrives. You sense weakness behind false confidence. You no longer need chaos to feel alive. Pain gave you that. It did not leave you broken, it left you aware. The trick is to stop resenting it. Stop asking why it happened. Start asking what it taught you. You didn't deserve the wound, but you do deserve the wisdom. So take it. Use it. Let it become the edge no one can dull. Let it become the silence no one can read. Machiavelli would say this is the mark of the truly dangerous, the person who turned their deepest hurt into holy armor and wears it without apology. There is a kind of presence that cannot be faked. It does not rely on volume, status, or approval. It does not chase recognition or cling to praise. It simply is. When such a person walks into a room, the atmosphere shifts, not because they demand attention, but because they no longer need it. Machiavelli recognized this rare force. He called it silent authority. It is not about control over others. It is about complete command over oneself. And once that is achieved, the world responds without knowing why. You've seen it before, someone who does not speak often, but when they do, every word cuts through the noise. Someone who doesn't compete, yet always seems to be the one others adjust to. This is not magic. It is the natural result of someone who has done the internal work most people avoid. The one who no longer needs to prove anything becomes untouchable, because they are no longer performing, they are being. Silent authority begins when you stop needing to be understood, when you stop explaining your worth to people who benefit from misunderstanding you, when you walk differently, not because someone is watching, but because you've stopped watching yourself through the eyes of others. You are not posturing. You are present. That kind of presence can only be built in solitude. It is forged in the long, private hours where you confront your fears, your rage, your shame, and survive them all. It is what remains after you stop chasing validation and start standing in your own knowing. Machiavelli believed that those who speak the least often hold the most power, because they have already had every argument in their own mind. They've tested themselves, refined themselves. They've buried the desperate hunger for approval and replaced it with stillness. That stillness is magnetic. It draws others in, even if they do not understand why. It creates discomfort in the insecure, admiration in the perceptive, and fear in the manipulative. Because they can't read you, they can't predict you, and they cannot shake you. The person with silent authority doesn't need to be dominant. They just need to be there, fully, calmly, unshaken. The power is in their restraint, their timing, their ability to make a single look say what 100 words never could. This presence cannot be mimicked. It must be earned, through self-awareness, through pain transformed into poise, through rejection turned into resolve. When you become this version of yourself, people notice, but they cannot label it. They feel it. They adjust to it. And that is when you realize you no longer need to ask for a seat at the table. You are the table. Machiavelli would say that is the final form of power, not to be praised, not to be feared, but to be felt, without trying, without asking, without effort, simply by existing in your full, unshakable truth. Power does not disappear, it waits. It waits in the silence you were afraid to break. It waits in the choices you were too afraid to make. It waits in the eyes you lowered, the truths you swallowed, the dreams you postponed for the sake of peace. But it never left you, not for a second. Machiavelli believed the most dangerous individuals are not the loudest or the strongest, they are the ones who finally stop pretending they are powerless. The moment you realize your strength was never taken, only buried, the game changes. You stop asking for permission. You stop performing for love. You stop fearing who you might become if you finally said what you meant and meant what you said. That version of you, the one you buried to survive, begins to rise. Slowly, reluctantly, but it rises. And with it comes a terrifying clarity. You were never too much. You were only too aware, too awake in a world that trains people to stay asleep. That's why they told you to tone it down, to be easier to manage. Because your presence, when fully owned, makes people uncomfortable not because you're wrong, but because you remind them of everything they gave up in themselves. Machiavelli would not have asked you to suppress that power. He would have told you to shape it, to study it like a weapon, to sharpen it with solitude, and to unleash it only when it matters most. That is the law of hidden strength. Power that is remembered, not granted, claimed, not requested. It does not scream, it does not flinch, it waits. And then, when the moment comes, it does not apologize. It moves. You do not need to announce your comeback. You only need to become undeniable. Let them underestimate you. Let them laugh, doubt, dismiss. Every time they do, your power grows in silence. And when you are ready, you will return not as a reaction, but as a force, one they cannot ignore, one they cannot control. Machiavelli would say this is the final step, not to become something new, but to return to what you were before the world taught you to hide. And if you've made it this far, you are already on your way back. Now the choice is yours. Stay small and keep waiting for someone to validate you, or step forward and watch the room shift without saying a word. Because once you awaken your hidden strength, you will never need to be loud again. The world will feel you without looking. If this chapter stirred something in you, it means you've already begun. Let it grow, let it burn. And if you're ready to go deeper into this kind of power, subscribe, because this is only the beginning.